I'm going to be talking to Sachi Gibson, who is a senior research associate with the Canadian Climate Institute and one of the authors of a new report, Net Zero Opportunities, a province by province comparison. And in this interview, we'll be talking about the Atlantic provinces. So Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Newfoundland and Labrador, and Prince Edward Island. So welcome to the interview, Sachi.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Well, let's talk about the risks. What kind of risks are the maritime, the Atlantic provinces running in terms of, risks that are related to the energy transition and the economic transition that is a part of that?
Sure. And we know when we look at Atlantic Canada, the provinces are quite different. They have some similarities. They're all fairly small economies. But there is a bit of a difference between a place like Newfoundland, Labrador, for example, that has, in the last couple decades, really relied a lot on oil and gas goods exports and as an economic driver, but also as a fiscal contributor, and other places like, the Maritimes, where that has been less of an economic contributor. And so, I think they have some challenges in terms of some regions of reasonably high unemployment, especially in rural and remote areas and relatively small economies, et cetera. But there is a difference in terms of how much risk they're exposed to with this low carbon transition between Newfoundland, Labrador, that still has a significant offshore, and the other provinces that have, more service-based economy, natural resources, but in other spaces like, fish and forests and agriculture as well.
Sure. So Newfoundland is a big oil and gas producer, so relatively low carbon compared maybe to Saskatchewan and Alberta, which might give them a bit of a cushion, but still there's obviously some risk there. What about in the other provinces, so New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and PEI? What kind of economic opportunities are related to technology, services, that sort of thing?
Absolutely. And so one of the things that we found in this analysis, so what we were looking at is across the country, how different provinces are able to gain a foothold in some of these markets where we expect to see a significant amount of demand growth as the global market shifts to hit net zero. So those markets include things like low carbon electricity, batteries and storage, clean fuels, electric vehicles, that kind of thing, where we see demand already starting to really boom in these spaces, in that we expect to see significant growth in the coming years. And so one of the things that we did notice is that there is momentum in these markets across the whole country, including in the Maritimes. And so even PEI, for example, which is a very small economy, has at least 6 companies that are working in a dedicated way in these low carbon markets and areas like, low carbon marine transportation, agriculture technology, et cetera. So we do see new companies, innovation happening across the region. In terms of Atlantic Canada, a lot of that activity is currently focused in Nova Scotia. So about 2/3 of those companies are currently headquartered in Nova Scotia. So there is a little bit of a diversity in terms of how much economic activity there is happening in the region related to these opportunities. But we definitely do see companies out here who are being successful at attracting capital to these opportunities that are, really gaining a foothold in some of these places we expect to see growth.
What kind of opportunities are we talking about? I know there's, like in Dalhousie, there's a lot of research going on for Tesla, oddly enough,
That's right.
on battery research. What other kinds of low carbon technologies or businesses are we talking about?
Yeah, so we're starting to see some areas of specialization in the various parts of the Maritime. So there are some folks who are working in ocean tech, which is kind of building on a historical advantage in that area. A few companies that are working in ag tech as well, and especially in the Maritime region and PEI, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia. Some of the larger incumbents, for example, McCain, Cavendish Farms in Nova Scotia, in PEI, are also acting as customers for some of these innovative companies. So like Truly, for example, which is an ag tech based in Nova Scotia, has a relationship with McCain Foods so there's a bit of a relationship of mutual benefit there. As you mentioned, there's a little bit of a cluster on batteries and storage. Jeff Dawn's lab at Dalhousie is an example of that. smart grids as well, a bunch of activity there. And a few companies that have really, hit the news more recently, winning awards, things like Carbon Cure, which is a carbon capture in cement company that's based out of Halifax here in Nova Scotia.
So it sounds like in a small economy like that, you have some innovation, some entrepreneurs, some create startups, but you're just not going to have the volume that you would have in a bigger province, and less likely to enjoy cluster benefits, that sort of thing. So I would assume then, is it fair to say that one of the barriers to take advantage of these opportunities is simply they have smaller labor pool, skilled employees. They've got less of a cluster. Maybe they're not even in a cluster. Those sorts of things. That must be a barrier for those provinces.
Yeah, and so that's an area that I think that there may also be some options for collaboration. There's some opportunity there, so in our analysis we did look across companies and like how provinces are kind of ranking next to each other, but there are ways in which provincial economies can work together in order to secure that mutual benefit. So there are other provinces, for example, that have significantly more like industrial customer base, or like just a bigger market in general. And if there's a way that governments can work together, the private sector can work together in order to do some matchmaking in that space, there's a lot of kind of mutually beneficial relationships that can happen. So I mentioned Carbon Cure, which is that carbon capture cement company. They're working on a project at the Calgary airport with an Alberta-based company to pilot their technology there. And that's in a situation in which, obviously good for Nova Scotia-based companies to grow that demand across the country, but also very good in the province where that is being deployed, because it reduces what their carbon intensity is there as well.
Is it fair to say then that given the nature of the global, things are just so much easier now to do business in other parts of the country or other parts of the world than it used to be. So if you have innovative companies like Carbon Cure and the folks that are working at Dalhousie on batteries, it makes it easier for them to develop their businesses because they can use the internet, they can partner with companies elsewhere. I can think of 34 years ago that was not the case. There was a real barrier, but less of a barrier now. So it comes down to maybe these businesses being more innovative, more aggressive. What's your take on that?
When we're looking at what it means for the economy, that's like net zero transition more generally, like the places where we expect to see demand decline, and places like coal, oil and gas, et cetera, the places where we expect to see demand growth and clean energy and some of these low carbon technologies, it's a global phenomenon. So we're not just talking about, a given province having a net zero goal, or even all of Canada being committed to this net zero transition. Some of these are really global market forces. And so that does, open up markets and lots of opportunity. But it also is a lot of competition. So, you see America and China and other countries really throwing a lot of economic weight behind where they see their own opportunities in things like, critical minerals or batteries or clean fuels, et cetera. And so, yes, absolutely. I think all of these companies that are starting up in Canada across the country, are seeing opportunity domestically, but are also potentially seeing a lot of growth globally.
Sachi, thank you very much. Really appreciate your insights.
Thank you.